Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Youth Activism Project's Presents School Policing Panel. Today, we're going to have 4 excellent guests, and they're going to have an amazing hour together as YAP Youth facilitate this conversation. The Grcb mission is that Girls Rock Campaign Boston empowers girls, women, and youth and adults with marginalized gender identities to believe in themselves by building a supportive community that fosters self-expression, confidence, and collaboration through music education and performance. This whole workshop series is put on by Youth Activism Project. Youth Activism Project is a virtual program for girls and youth with marginalized gender identities. In the fall, YAP youth research a topic they care about. Over the winter, they take what they've learned and share it with our community. This panel is the 3rd event in their workshop series. And in the spring, they react to what they've learned with creative activism. You can learn more about YAP at the link in at the Girls Rock Campaign Boston website. And please keep an eye out because on Monday, we have the 4th workshop in the series going up on our YouTube channel, Creativity and Politics, created by Kay Marion, our own panelist. We're really excited about it. So I'm going to pass it over to the youth now, who are going to take it away.
Hi, I'm Carolyn. I use she, her pronouns, and I love cooking and playing the bass.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm just really excited to be here and help facilitate this conversation.
Hi, I'm Esme. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I love listening to music and reading, and I am so excited to be a part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Dora. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 15, and I'm really excited to share what we learned with you guys. And I will pass it on to the panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ivanna Solano, and I am the co-founder of Love Your Magic. I use she, her pronouns, and a little bit about the work that I do. Love Your Magic is a grassroots organization committed to the healthy development of Black and Brown girls, specifically in Massachusetts. We engage in, curate, and design strategic programs and initiatives with the sole aim of empowering Black and Brown girls. And I am so excited to be sharing space with you all today and learning and growing together. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Erin Seaton. I use she, her pronouns. I teach in the education department at Tufts University, teaching teachers and school psychologists about school-based mental health and about confronting and dismantling systemic racism and oppression in schools. And I'm really happy to be here in conversation with this community.
My name is Kay Marion. I use the she, her, her series. I am an artivist, so my art is vocal performance of all genres, really. And my activism is grassroots, youth-led, centering the marginalized, working with organizations like the NAACP. And I am really excited to be here with you guys and to engage in dialogue. I think it's going to be great.
Hi, my name is Madison Krohnheim. I use she, her, her pronouns. I'm an inclusion facilitator in Newton and also a board certified music therapist. I've been involved with GRCB for a while now, and I've also done some research on mental health in schools, as well as policing in schools. Grew up in Florida, and I love plants and reading.
Okay then. Well, just to get started, we wanted to ask all of you how you define school policing.
I want to say something that came up in the conversation last week when you led your research that I've been thinking about all week in just response to that question, which is that school policing can involve having police officers at schools, but I think maybe it was Thora, I can't remember, who was so clear about the ways in which policies can also be a form of policing, and discipline policies in particular, but policies about dress code, attendance, homework also are a form of policing. And I was so happy that you expanded that definition, because I think it's really important if we're dismantling how policing operates to not just look at the people in buildings, but how schools are run, what the core values are, and how those policies are enacted.
I would love to build on that. I think when I think about school policing, what sticks out are really the policies, practices, and the cultural expectations of schools and the ways in which those really impact the experiences of our young people. And I think that a lot of times when we think about those policies, practices, and cultural expectations, more often than not, they send a message to our young people. And I think we often don't think about what those messages are and how they translate to young people. And so I think we as a community or as a collective really need to be critical about that in order to really be able to tackle those issues within our school system.
And I feel like this is going to be like an awesome conversation already because I'm getting like excited. Yes, to what the both of you said. And in terms of the message that was just mentioned, and I cannot take credit for this language. This was given to me by a friend who is a vocalist and also someone who just wants to be an ally to all communities and centering the marginalized in every aspect of their lives. But it was mentioned in conversation that a lot of times when we're talking about policing, we're talking about who is receiving grace. These are kids that we're dealing with, right? And kids are not going to be perfect. Kids are learning how to navigate and maneuver through society. But when we think about policing in schools, a lot of times the metric is simply who is going to be receiving grace for not being able to attend school on time, for not having the clothes that they need to abide by whatever the uniform codes are, for having a meltdown in class. And I think that at the root of this conversation, we're probably just going to end up continuing to go back to this point about who is receiving grace and why, and who gets to decide who is receiving grace. So I don't know if I'm like streamlining or jumping over any questions, but I was just like, ooh, some heat on this panel. I love it.
Yeah, and I think tying into what everyone's saying, when you are looking at policing in schools as it has existed historically, it's focused around this punitive framework. And whether it's an actual police officer or, as has been mentioned, policies in schools, it's really you're gonna get punished and receive punishment for all of these things without this learning lens and this supportive lens. And I think it affects everything we go to, whether it's the mental health resources that are available, whether students end up accessing those services. It's a huge issue with systemic racism when you look at the statistics of who is actually receiving this policing. So I 100% agree with what everyone's saying so far. This is wonderful.
So the next question is, why is activism and the issue of school policing important to you?
I can start. So I think for me, this work is personal. As a Black woman, this is like very much like at the intersection of my identity. And as a former school teacher, I experienced firsthand the ways in which our school system really criminalizes and adultifies our young people. I think growing up, my experiences very much silenced me in many ways, and I felt like I didn't have a voice. And so I think this issue for me is personal because I think it's important to make sure that our young people know that they have a voice. It's important for our young people to know that they have power. And I think that currently the way that our systems are set up really rob our people of that power, of that voice that they have. And so I think that having these conversations and reminding our young people of their power and of that voice that they have is our collective responsibility. And we serve as kind of like that vessel to make sure that we do right by our young people, because ultimately, I think personally, specifically, when we're talking about Black and brown girls, like when you pour into our Black and brown girls, you're pouring into the world, because we know that, you know, they carry the world on their backs, if we're being honest here. And so I think that for me, this work is important because growing up, I didn't have those people investing in these conversations or even having these conversations. And so I want to be for young people what I wish I had when I was growing up.
I think about this topic so often As being an inclusion facilitator, I work with students with disabilities. And the district I work in is an all-inclusive district where all the students with disabilities are in the general education classrooms with everyone else. And when you look historically, it's a lot of students of color, a lot of students with disabilities. These are the ones that are receiving policing and that are the ones having to be affected by a lot of these policies. And it sends this message that in order to be able to go on with the rest of schooling, you have to shut down your emotions. Any problems that are happening to you have to be kept within. And basically it's a cause and effect that they are taught to just keep it all within or face the consequences. And whether it's students with disabilities or it's students without disabilities, it's teaching this framework of holding everything in, and it creates unhealthy adult-like behavior. I mean, we see it nowadays with older generations that don't know how to properly express their emotions, and it leads to so many other, like, you know, it's a ripple effect. And when we're able to change the narrative at a younger age, we are able to allow for everybody to kind of process what they're feeling and find the root cause of these issues, rather than decide we're just going to punish you and not figure out where this is coming from.
This next question is.
Can I
sorry,
add to that question?
I didn't mean to cut anyone off. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. It's always that funny Zoom tension of who's going to speak next. So I just want to add that there is a really clear connection between school policing, discipline policies, and expulsion practices. And for me, it's a civil rights issue, right? If we're looking at discipline and we're removing children from schools, children who are coming to schools wanting to be loved and wanting to learn, and we're turning schools into a place where children, and particularly Black and brown girls and boys, and feel as if they are policed, surveilled, monitored, controlled, we're not creating a space where you can learn. So it's actually, as free and appropriate education is a civil right, it denies children their civil rights. And I think this conversation is really important as one of intersectionality, where girls are particularly policed because of their bodies, because of their appearance, and that those standards are entrenched in white supremacy. I think it's so, for me, it's so important to really point out to the ways in which girls are often left out of the conversation of school policing. So we often talk about the school to prison pipeline. Girls aren't always in prison at the same rate as boys, or incarcerated at that rate. So that if we're not having this conversation about gender at this intersection, then we're also missing the ways in which girls are excluded from their education. And I think that's, again, why it's so powerful to have you as, 15-year-olds here being present and part of that conversation, so we can elevate your voices.
Absolutely. And then just to piggyback off of everything everyone else has said, I think a lot of the reason why I'm here today and why I care about this issue is gaslighting. I think it was mentioned earlier that, like, the experience of being a Black woman, or a Black person in general, Black man, Black non-gender conforming individual, means that a lot of this is stuff that you've been through personally, or you've seen friends and family members, aunties, uncles, cousins, parents go through it. And having someone in your life to tell you that what happened to you at school was wrong and unacceptable is crucial for our youth. And I think that's why it's just so important that we're having this conversation, and that the youth know that there are adults out there who have your back, who have been through what it's like to be in your shoes, and also who are able to sympathize with you in this struggle. So again, I'm just so excited we're talking about this. This is wonderful.
Would anyone else like to add on to that? Okay then. The next question we have is, do you believe that having police in schools is harmful to students, or that it has a positive effect through protecting the schools? And if so, why?
So I don't know if we're all trying to like jump in and be the first to answer this, but I'm pretty sure we all agree there is no evidence that having physical police in schools makes schools any safer. There is a lot of evidence that shows that having police in schools is detrimental to students' sense of safety, their sense of well-being, their mental health, and their connection with the school community. So we know that having police in schools is harmful to students. And because of zero tolerance policies, we've actually ramped up, and you did such a great job again last week of saying this in your own presentation. We've not only ramped up having physical police in schools, but we've taken away resources. The way in which police are funded in schools is often left to local districts, so that districts end up making choices about cutting teachers and counselors to keep police in place.
I can jump in, but I really think that's that on that. I think we all are in agreement.
Would anyone like to add anything else to that? Okay, well, sort of to jump off of the discussion that we've been having about the issue of school policing, what solutions do you like? Do you think that there are better alternatives to having police in school, whether that means actual police officers or policing policies? Are there any solutions?
I think going back on what Erin was saying, that we have taken away from all of the mental health resources in schools, and we need to reverse and go back to that. We need more social workers. We need more school psychologists in schools, counselors, nurses. We are losing those. And if we even have them in schools, they're working part-time hours. I mean, the social emotional curriculum is, I think some schools have done a much better job over the past few years of trying to include it more often, but we could be doing much, much better. I know that in my district, I'm safety care certified, more as like a special educator, but also to just do de-escalation strategies with just about anybody, where there's so many emotional and discussion-based de-escalation strategies that you could use with students, that if the issue is that they're in, like, you know, let's say a heightened state due to something, where you can de-escalate them and talk to them, actually, which seems like a pretty basic concept, but actually talking to them about what the issues are and kind of separating yourself from the issue and turning into a real conversation where students can actually debrief from you. I think we forget that although these are children, that when you usually sit down and talk to a child about an issue that they're having, they can give a pretty sound reason once you help them get to it as to where their feelings are coming from, but we're so quick to dismiss that. I know the school that I work at, we have a program in place that I'm part of where it's me, the principal, the school psychologist, social worker, who else? The school nurse, some of us that meet every week to talk about some students who may be needing extra support in school, and we come up with plans on like how we can support those students next. And even just little conversations like that, where you're instead of jumping from here to here and trying to fix the issue, there's all these other tiers that you can go through in fixing problems for students. So we've been so quick to jump all the way up here that we've missed all these healthy middle grounds for students.
I'd love to build on that a bit. I think, you know, I love quotes, and in the words of Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, the people closest to the pain should really be closest to the power. And so I think for me, one of the solutions is really just including students more. Giving students that voice and including them in the development of those codes of conduct. So like, what are going to be some of those rules in our schools that we're all going to have to abide by? What are going to be some of those policies or practices and cultural expectations that our school is going to have? Because I also think that that builds a sense of investment from students and really lends itself so that students feel like this is more so a community and I'm not being policed or I'm not under surveillance, but this is very much a community where my voice matters and where I feel like my experience is not one where where it's negative, where it's one that I am valued. And so I think that if we were to do that a lot more and include young people, we would see a lot of changes happening within our education system. I think that young people are the experts of their experience, and as much as we as adults think we know it all, we don't. And so I think it's important for us to just really take a step back and listen to young people, because more often than not, they have the answers, and we just have to set our ego aside and just listen.
Would anyone else like to add on to that question?
Yeah, I'd like to add just that you cannot learn when you feel afraid, silenced, threatened, or traumatized when you walk into a school building. And at this moment, seeing a physical police officer in uniform at the beginning of the school day is it's not just stigmatizing, but it's traumatizing for students. To walk in the building and have that often be the first person that you see when you walk in. And so, there's a lot of research, first of all, just speaking to what Ivanna said, that student voice is critical, but also to the power of relationships, that rather than grounding schools in a punitive kind of perspective, that we move to a relational perspective so that teachers know students. Schools reach out and include families in building their policies and practices, that if there's a problem at school, we know who to go to, and that you can have a conversation with people that love and care about you. So restorative justice is one practice that's grounded in relationship. But I think that core piece of being part of a community that cares about you, values you, uplifts you is so essential to this. And relationships offer a different way of looking at even things like discipline. And I'll just put a plug in for Monique Morris's book, Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, which re-envisions what schools would look like if they really cared about attending to the voices and experiences of Black and Brown girls.
Okay. To kind of base off that question, what actions do you think people should be taking to stop the school to prison pipeline and systemic racism in the education system?
I could just propose a couple of things. I think it starts with interacting where you live. I think a lot of times people look at big issues like the school to prison pipeline and a host of other issues like, okay, we have to look at this from a national scale, we have to expand. And I think a lot of times individuals tend to miss what's going on in their own community. There's somebody who lives in your city who is fighting and needs your support. There are organizers in your city who are planning events and people aren't showing up, who are planning actions and people aren't showing up. So I think it starts with people looking around them at who is doing the work in their city. And if you find that no one is doing the work, then that is when you start new initiatives. But if there are people doing work, then the first logical step to me would be to support them, to engage, to show up at the meetings, to share with friends and family and have these conversations. I mean, even coming to view a conversation like this, right, would be considered a great action step because you're educating yourself on the issue, you're learning about different solutions. And I'm sure we'll probably present even more action items as this conversation continues that you can then follow up on.
I'm just going to say that the first step we need to do is get police out of schools and give that money back to schools and back to the community. I think that's a little bit of stop the harm, right? Like stop the harm right away and then begin to remedy the harm. So Madison talked about particularly thinking about what services need to be in place. We are sending kids back into schools in a racial pandemic, an economic pandemic, a global health pandemic. Anxiety is high, trauma is high. We have to stop the education system the way it is, because what we know is that it's not working. And I think there's a real need to rebuild schools from the ground up. We're really thinking about how do we remedy the harm? So how do we place students who feel marginalized right at the center of the curriculum, of the policies, of the administration. So who is leading the school? What do they look like? Do teachers look like their students? Do they care about their students? How is the school connected with the community? So stop the harm and remedy the harm, I think, are two of the important ones. But getting police out of school would be one of the first places we could go, because that allows us to reframe how we think about discipline.
I think tied to some of the stuff that Kay was saying as well, we have to start having more of these conversations at a more community-based level. As a teacher, I'm always trying to think about how my internal biases are affecting the way I teach, the way that I interact outside of work as a human being. And I think whether you're a teacher, whether you're a student, whether you're a parent, just anybody, we have to start really acknowledging those internal biases and understand that racism and being anti-racist is not something that we can fix overnight, and that it's a conversation that has to be continuously held. And once we can have those conversations around that, it will bleed into this issue of policing. When you're a teacher in class, or if you're a student in class and you're noticing that another student who is of color is having an issue, if you notice that maybe they're being policed more in some sort of way or another, really try to take that lens of what is going on here. And we really have to just be more aware and have these conversations on that more close contact level, so that then it can reach higher and higher up. I think kind of like Kay was saying, it's so easy to think we should be fixing these problems from here on up. And that would make more sense, but it's not going to happen until we start from this level and we're having these honest conversations that then can influence more and more and more people.
I love to echo that. I think for me, the work really starts at the personal level. I think that there's a level of self-awareness and personal work that we all need to do in order to really change this issue in our school systems. I think in particularly, I'm thinking about the experiences of educators. And as a former educator myself, I think one of the things that I had to reflect on a lot was just the harm that so many of us cause. And I think it's important to, one, acknowledge the fact that like sometimes we do cause harm. And it's not the best feeling, but it's important to acknowledge when you have caused harm, accept that, and then take the time to unlearn some of that harm and work through it in order to really be able to then make the impact that it is that you want to make in young people's lives. And I think if we all were able to kind of look at ourselves critically and then do the work to make sure that we are showing up intentionally for our young people, we would really be able to shift the way that these systems are impacting our youth. But I definitely think it takes a level of accountability, a level of unlearning, and then relearning in healthy ways how we can show up for our young people in a way that makes sense for them.
So the next question is, what are some lessons that you learned from your work or activism that will stick with you and that have influenced your work later on?
I think that personal piece that Ivanna was hitting on is really important. This work that we all do is in trying to change policies and change the way we speak to other people and the way that we look at the world is so important. And I think that after a certain point, we reach this plateau of like, oh, I'm doing great at this. I've got this, and not realizing that the work has to continue. And that's one of the hardest parts, where you almost have this sense of, I don't want to say being a know-it-all, but you think like, I'm not the problem, they're the problem. I have it figured out now. Like I get it. But that this is an ever-changing thing as the world is changing every day, as new traumas are happening due to all that is happening in the world, that we have to constantly be aware and know that it's okay to be wrong, and know that things are changing and that you have to change the way you're thinking, especially as working in schools or working with youth. You have to be aware of this, because when you set this expectation for young people that you're always right, you're further building onto this punitive standpoint of this is me and you are the other and I am not wrong. And by showing that you are also someone that makes mistakes and that you are willing to learn, you are setting the precedent that everybody can keep learning and that we can continue to be making mistakes and having these honest conversations of change.
I can share. You can go ahead.
Okay, no, I was just gonna say, I think we all just sort of got convicted right there, because I think that's the lesson. I think it's really easy to come back into this work. No, I'm not even gonna speak for all of us, I'm gonna speak for myself. It was very easy for me to come back into this work with a little bit of a personal vendetta, right? Being a Black woman in the system, you know, when I'm working with the NAACP Youth Council and I hear that something happened to one of my babies at the schoolhouse, I'm ready to pull up. You know, I'm ready to walk into the school and say, who said something to one of my kids? This isn't gonna happen here. But you always have to consider the needs of the children first. Even if you are dealing with something that is traumatic and triggering for you, even if you are on the right side of things, it is so important to always center the kids' needs. We can't always pull up, you know, guns blazing, ready to take down whoever. And I think as adults, we tend to be very territorial of the youth. I shouldn't even be saying kids, because you're not children. You are children, but you guys are youth. We're going to use a little bit more of a mature word here for you, because you guys are some very mature youth activists that I see on this panel and a part of this organization right now. But yeah, I think the biggest lesson for me is I got to step out of mama mode. I have to, in order to do this work. You have to have a little bit of strategic thinking. You have to lead with emotion in a way that is balanced, be passionate, so that they know that you're genuine and invested and that you're there for them. But also simultaneously, if you really care about getting this work done, you're going to have to be, you know, strategically efficient.
I think for me, one of the lessons that I learned pretty early on was not being afraid to shake the table. I think when it comes to issues like school policing, it's bound to make people uncomfortable. And I think a lot of times when you make people uncomfortable, you can do one of two things. You can either lean into that discomfort or kind of shy away from that. And I think initially I was like, oh, I'm ruffling feathers. Maybe I should like take a step back. But in doing so, I was doing a disservice to the young people that I was serving at the time. And so I had to think a lot about, you know, what is it that I want and who is it that I'm doing this work for? And I'm here to support and uplift Black and brown girls. And so I knew then that it wasn't about me. So I think for me, it's about the Black and the brown girls that I serve. And if that means that I need to shake the table and it's going to ruffle some feathers and it's going to get some people upset, that's okay, because it's all in service of the young girls that I service. And so I think not being afraid of that, and then teaching young girls the same. And so I think that for me, that's why teaching young people that they have a voice is so important. I definitely think that there's a way to advocate so that you're heard, because I think specifically as a Black woman, a lot of times you're viewed as the angry Black woman. So what is the balance that you want to strike so that your voice is heard while also making sure that you're not silenced? So I think that for me, it's particularly important to shake the table. So I teach young people to shake the table, speak up, and don't let them silence you.
I think I'm going to piggyback on things that all of you have said. You know, for me as a white woman, sometimes it means getting out of the way, and sometimes it means picking up when my peers are really tired. So one thing I've learned this year is that there's a real mental health cost to activism, and that we have to carry that burden together. It gets really exhausting. So really attending to the cost and reminding, you know, Kay, you said it a couple questions ago, like, I've got your back, and also that you matter. I think the real cost of racism in particular is an invalidation, right? Of invalidation of voice, of experience, of an individual as deserving of love and care and a space at the table. And so the work of activism is sometimes saying that over and over and over again until you're beginning to counter all those voices that are around you in the world. So I hope you hear that, you know, from all of us as you're sitting here.
Would any of you like to add anything else to this amazing conversation around that question? Well, sort of related to that last one is our question. What changes have you seen as a result of activism or work that you've been involved in or your community has been involved in regarding this topic?
So I can jump in. I feel that this is not relevant to the community, but it is an example of change that I have seen happen. And I think if it can happen in my home state of North Carolina, it can happen in Massachusetts. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, like the Tar Heels. I don't know if you guys even recognize that shade of blue up here. But the Chapel Hill community is one of the most liberal communities in the state, just politically. Not pushing an agenda, that's just a fact. And so simultaneously, it was quite interesting because it's also one of the wealthiest communities in the state. And it is also one of the communities in the state where we see the highest equity gap as it relates to everything, test scores, over policing of Black and brown students in that area, you name it. All of these issues are encapsulated in this like wealthy yet somehow extremely liberal district. And so there was a report that was filed. I'm of course blanking of the name of the report right now, but it was basically done by community members and professors at my alma mater. And they basically pulled together the stats, they pulled together the receipts, and students were able to take this to the school board meeting and say, what do you want to do about it? And so a lot of the changes that I saw was a result of, like I said, community members, concerned professors and intellectuals in the area who knew how to run the stats and the reports, coming together to talk to the school board, and the school board listening. And if they didn't listen, they got voted out. Some things we had to lobby for a little bit on some state representation levels. Some things we had to stage sit-ins, marches, et cetera, et cetera. But it took calling specific members of the community who worked in the school systems to the mat and having discussions with them about the way that they were teaching children to make it a safer place, to ask for more therapists in the schools, to ask for less police officers. It took a lot of community dialogue, but it is something that I can say that I've seen happen, and it is possible. And hopefully it's something that will be taking place in this new community that I'm currently in.
I think piggybacking off of Kay, I'm seeing a lot of similar things, at least in the school I work in, and you know, you're seeing, especially in a time like now, more honest conversations, more trust building, I think, between the staff and the kids. I think we're really trying to build this relationship up front. It's kind of a representation of, unfortunately, how our healthcare system isn't in this country, where you take this more preventative state and we try to make sure we've been trying to make sure we build trust with the youth in the school ahead of time, so that when these issues do arise, that they know that there is a safe place for them to go to. And I think you're seeing a lot less bigger issues, and maybe someone might say a lot more smaller issues, but you would rather that than obviously the bigger issues, because when somebody is able to come up to you with a smaller problem, one could say, of just, you know, I'm feeling anxious about all the kids coming back or something like that. It seems like such a minute problem in that moment, but that could lead down the road, if it wasn't addressed, to a bigger, larger policing issue that you wouldn't even be able to understand is coming from this smaller issue. So being able to have these conversations and build this rapport, I think it's a tough concept, because once you're fixing the problems, it's hard to then look and say that work has been done, because you no longer have these issues that are happening. But building these relationships, I think, so far has proven to be really helpful. And I hope that it can continue throughout the country for everywhere, and that students, especially students of color and young girls of color, can feel like they have that person or those people in the schools that they can go to for these small problems ahead of time, so that it doesn't build up into something for them.
Nice. So does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Madison and Kay, you made me think, as you're talking about building up communities, you made me think about Stacey Abrams and the work in Georgia that relied on grassroots efforts to really bring people in. And I would say in schools in particular, you need to find your people and you need to get together. I think one of the real pains of racism is that it also disenfranchises and keeps people separate. And so forming collectives just like this, where I'm looking at the computer and at Ivanna's organization thinking, okay, how can I reach out? How can I get my students involved? But across schools, communities, at Tufts, we have a group of staff and faculty and students that are really working together to push the university to make changes. So organizing parents, bringing parents in a school community, thinking about how staff voices are represented and heard. Having a student get a seat on a school board makes a really big difference. So how can we then use collective power to make transformation?
Okay, anyone else? No, all right. So now I have specific questions, and this question is for Erin and Madison. What effects can police in schools have on the mental health or general well-being of our students?
I mean, it's not good, as I think we can all gather from these conversations. I think, as Erin said, the research has shown that it's not positive and it's more detrimental than anything else. And it definitely holds back students from knowing that they can share their emotions. The thought is basically, you have acted this way, therefore you will be punished. And instead, not looking at how they are feeling and where the cause of that may be from. So then the cause is forgotten about, and in their minds, they're taught not to share those problems. So I think it leads, especially because those policing in general is unfortunately acted upon onto youth of color, and especially Black and brown girls of color, that they are less likely to then seek out behavioral services later on in life, and kind of leads to that school to prison pipeline that I think we've all kind of mentioned so far.
Just piggyback on that and say, I think most importantly in this moment is that having police officers at school, and I know I said this before, is a form of trauma. Schools cannot inflict trauma on students. Schools need to be there to remedy harm, not inflict this. And so on a daily basis, we're watching kids come to school and be re-triggered, traumatized in the space where they're supposed to be learning and loved and supported. So that, I would say, is the biggest mental health piece, is that it's inflicting trauma and pain on students, and particularly disproportionately on Black and brown students, but also creating a culture in which students feel as if their school is less safe. So once we add police and add things like metal detectors, students actually have the perception that their school is less safe than it really is. So it creates a culture of fear, anxiety, disconnection, isolation, as though the people in power may be people that you can't turn to. Think about what it would look like if you walked in the front door and instead somebody gave you, and I know this is hard in COVID, somebody gave you a giant hug, or the school band was there playing outside as you arrived at the school, welcome you into that space. That's what mental health would look like. It's not happening in schools, and the effect is real, and real not only in causing harm, but then taking away the right to education. Because if you can't learn without fear, you cannot come to school and learn.
So the next question is for Kay. What type of activism do you think is the most effective for making change in an educational setting?
Oh, this is my favorite kind of question. Grassroots, youth-led, centering the marginalized, Black and brown folks, queer folks, disabled folks, folks that are coming from a lower socioeconomic background, all of the isms, just all of them, centering who is literally the most marginalized and thinking about what their needs are at this point in time. Everything is community led with me. And I think that's, as I was stating in my little anecdote that I was talking about earlier, like that's how a lot of that stuff got done, right? So like, yes, the political system is here and you can use that to your advantage, but unless the community is organized and clear about what it is that they want and what it is that they're trying to get out of the political system, it's going to be very difficult in 2021 to actually see those things through. I think Aaron was the one who brought up the Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Wonderful example of how grassroots can contribute to that and motivate the political system to move on our behalf, like it should, but it isn't. But okay.
Would anyone like to add on to that? Okay, well, this next question is for Ivanna, and we just want to know, like, what is and what has Love Your Magic been doing to help counter school policing?
Thank you for asking. So we have been doing a lot of work around school policing. A lot of the work that we do is really grounded in teaching young people, specifically Black and brown girls, how to practice self-advocacy, self-love, and sisterhood. For us, we believe that by doing that work, we can really empower young girls to use their voice and really shake the table to create change in their classrooms and in their communities. But we also realize that the work is great when you do it with young people, but it's also important to impact the adults that are uplifting and working with our girls. So we also do work with educators and the families and the community members that are working directly with our young people. Prior to the pandemic, we were hosting a series of film screenings. So we were hosting film screenings of Push Out and hosting conversations around the criminalization and adultification of Black girls in schools, engaging both young people and community members to really think about our role as a collective in dismantling the school to prison pipeline and really just shaping the experiences of Black and brown girls. We most recently developed a curriculum called Unlearning School with the idea that we would work with young girls to reimagine what their education could look like. So those conversations really give young people an opportunity to reflect on their educational journeys. It gives them an opportunity to think about school funding and then reimagine what their hope is for their schools. And then ultimately the goal is that young girls will be able to have those conversations both in that setting, then take what they learned from that setting and talk to their friends, talk to their peers, talk to their teachers, and challenge the systems in their schools. And so we've been doing some of that work. We've done some of that work with you all at Girls Rock. And we have also been doing some of that work with other nonprofit organizations and schools as well. But really, you know, we hope to continue to do that work locally and nationally, because we believe that it is our collective responsibility to dismantle this and really shake the table, because our Black and our brown girls deserve so much better.
I think that brings us to the end of the questions that we had prepared. If any of you have anything else that you would like to add, we would love to hear it. If not, I think that brings us just about.
Yeah, maybe Ivanna's comment made me think of this, but at the beginning, I think it was Thora, you can correct me if I'm wrong, who mentioned last conversation about school policy. We talked a lot about policing, but I think school policy in and of itself is something where, first of all, parents, students, and faculty can organize around and change and really think through those systems. But in terms of mental health, I also think that, you know, even if there aren't physically police in schools, if the policies feel marginalizing or invalidating your identity, we're setting up a system in which girls feel as if they don't belong, or they don't belong fully, right? Who they are fully doesn't belong in that space of learning. And so I love the way, Ivanna, you're talking about training girls to then bring those conversations back to their school and advocate for change. And to create a space where, you know, you have a seat at this table.
Yes,
Hey, I'd love to hear more about your work and your performance and you called it artivism. Do you want to describe that a little bit to the group?
This is a question for me. I'm triple checking. It cut out for a little bit, so I couldn't hear it, but I heard artivism and I was like, I think I was the one that said it. Yeah. So artivism is basically just what I've started calling the stuff that I do. I am actually studying at Unlearning School of Music at Bard College as an opera singer right now. So I'm getting my master's and engaging in conversations like this, aside from, you know, like emergency situations in my hometown or just like around me in the space that I come across are really my main forms of organizing right now. But as I graduate, I want to get involved in more grassroots organizations like Ivanna's, and the NAACP, Democracy Now!, et cetera, et cetera. One of my bachelor's degrees was in public policy. So I'm very engaged in politics in general, but I also very much so believe in like, yeah, the system is here, so we should utilize it as best we can, but also we're gonna be the only ones who take care of us, right? Like we're gonna have to work both within and without the system in order to bring balance and restorative justice and reparational justice to the forefront of our society. So yes, and I think art is also a great way to do that. I've just found that like a lot of people who engage in this work are like very artistic in nature. And a lot of times, if I'm talking to you directly, it might be really boring if I start spouting off random statistics. But if I can engage with you in a way that is tangible, like through art or vocal performance like I do, I found that people are like way more susceptible to want to engage in those conversations. And I got to actually work with the summer camp youth at one point. Jesus, of course I'm blanking on the dates right now, last summer during the COVID extravaganza when things were still, you know, new to us. And it was a really interesting experience to talk with them about how they can take an issue that they care about and create some sort of art out of it and use that to bring awareness to the community. I think it's awesome. And I would love to hear more about like other projects that you guys are doing, because I think you guys just have such an awesome organization going on here. Kudos to y'all.
Thank you, Kay. Can I ask the girls a question? What do you need from us as adults?
I guess I can go first. From adults, just like support. Like that's really it for me. Like you can't always change everything that's wrong in the world, but support is always a wonderful thing to have, and it can mean the world sometimes.
Sorry.
Sorry, you go right ahead.
Okay. I would say, Sarah said support, I would say support and understanding, because, our generation or us young people, as I believe it was Ivanna said, we don't express, how we feel. We tend to bottle things up. So if we have at least like one person there to, if that is willing to listen to us and willing to, be like, I understand what you're going through, let me help you. So like if anyone could be there, like adults, even if you don't know what, that kid's going through, just to be there and sit there with them and be like, I hear you, whatever you're saying is valid, I understand. And so I think that's something that everyone needs, be you a child or an adult, anyone needs, that support system. So I think that's really, that's something everyone should have.
Absolutely. What you said about listening, and I think this is also something that came up in all of your discussions around the questions that we brought up. Just, listening. And like you were saying, Thora, understanding is just absolutely so important. And it was really heartening to hear you all talking about that and acknowledging how it's really important, because I think that is really just one of the biggest things that can be done to help.
I agree with all of you. I think listening is so important and it really can go a long way. It's so simple. And it's I think it's the biggest way.
Any more questions? No more questions. Okay, so I think that concludes this, and Charlotte is back.
Thank you all so much for participating. This was an incredible conversation. I got so much out of it, and I can't wait to share this on our YouTube channel so that everyone can watch it. You all are amazing. It was really, really powerful to hear you. Thank you for coming. I just want to plug one more time that this Monday, Kay's workshop that teaches you how to do artivism of your own is going up on our YouTube channel. Please check it out. It's going to be amazing. And the youth are going to be watching that workshop next week as well as they start their artivism journey. And next semester, please stay tuned to the YAP Instagram to see the activism that they do around this issue. We're really excited to see what comes out of this. So thank you so much for coming. You're all amazing. And thank you everyone who watched from home. Have a great day, everyone.